All right, we're live. Today, you're just going to watch me. Honestly, I'm just going through our podcast, the full thing, full release on Monday. I'll try to listen to the first 30 minutes to see whether or not I can catch any final mistakes, things that I might have missed in the beginning. And you're going to see little things like this where, hey, in this section, where say, I think we will always build tax credit. You see there's typos right here, right? Patrick, full podcast updates slash edits. So I got to get the timer 018 should be, I think we will always build tax credit, not weave and not.
I think unless we do major tax reform again as a society, we're going to always see that as a tool. So I think we were all challenged in a lot of different ways to think outside of the box, which is really, frankly, where I think the future is going. It's one of the things that we're really excited about as we see more and more of this being adopted in the community. Really understand like difference between mass timber, concrete, and modular. Overall, capitalizing, getting the finance stack for a mass timber building may be more difficult than say a concrete building. So when the developer is going through that triage of kind of figuring out what they want to build, if they're going to build mass timber, usually they have a strong commitment, whether it's organizationally or personally, to sustainability.
Oh, okay. Actually, you know what? I think I'm gonna start the podcast with my question.
So these alternatives, I think we will always build tax credit housing.
See, it's very important for us to figure out.
As a society, we're going to always see that as a tool. So I think we were all challenged in a lot of different ways to think outside of the box, which is really, frankly, where I think the future is going. It's one of the things that we're really excited about as we see more and more of this being adopted in the community.
All right, I'm actually gonna say, actually, let us start Patrick's podcast at the 035 mark. With my question, asking him about the different types of construction.
Between mass timber, concrete, and modular. Overall, capitalizing, getting the finance stack for a mass timber building may be more difficult than, say, a concrete building. So when the developer is going through that triage of kind of figuring out what they want to build, if they're going to build mass timber, usually they have a strong commitment, whether it's organizationally or personally, to sustainability. The reality is if we're looking at high density affordable housing, concrete tends to make the most sense from a development standpoint today. The reason being is that we see the speed of construction with concrete. We can do anywhere from 3 to 5 day pour cycles, so your floors are going up.
And it's gonna be pour cycles.
Much faster than, say, a conventional wood frame building or other types of approaches. So you're able to maximize that floor ceiling space. You're getting the most amount of units with proper head height in the smallest amount of building possible, which allows you to save money on your exterior skin and other systems throughout the process. So being smart about your structure has cascading impacts to how you build the rest of it. Now, the other side of that is thinking about long-term insurance. We've seen a lot of our clients that would traditionally build a conventional stick frame product looking more at concrete because of this insurance savings on permanent property insurance over the course of, say, years. And we did some modeling for a client on a 7-story building, which was originally podium with sort of framing above, and we looked at that compared to a concrete approach. Concrete saved them time because the construction schedule was faster due to concrete structure, but also our builder's risk policy that we carried during that project was roughly a third of the cost for non-combustible construction versus something like wood framing. And then you pass that along to permanent property insurance. A concrete building, if the same hypothetical building, save the client close to $5 million over the course of 10 years of owning that building. So again, you might have a development lead that's thinking about the construction cost, but a lot of times the development part doesn't always talk to the asset management part of that company. And having conversations between those silos is really important because that may not be a pain point for someone, but it also may be a deal killer for someone. So again, we don't come in with the approach saying, hey, you must do this, as this is why we think it makes sense. We're saying, these are the pros and cons of these different approaches. We can build them all for you. It's your choice. As a general contractor, we've completed over 65 mass timber buildings, which I believe is more than any other GC in the United States. And so we're really committed to that technology for a few reasons. We like that there's heavily influenced by prefabrication. The idea that we can take raw lumber, whether that's like a piece of glulam or whether that's a piece of CLT, bring it to our fabrication facility, set it up with the hardware, ship it out to our job sites, and it goes up very quickly. It's great for urban infill sites. It's very quiet as it goes up. And so from the construction logistics standpoint, you really see that benefit. But then let's talk about what the product at the end of the day looks like.
Okay, welcome to the episode of Affordable Housing and Real Estate Investing. Guys, I've been looking forward to this interview for like weeks. I have Patrick Ottolini from Swinnerton on the podcast today. Now, this guy has worked in the city. This guy is a musician. He's in construction. I mean, talk about doing a little bit of everything and bringing the best out to help us build more affordable housing. So I could not be more excited to bring on Patrick onto the podcast.
Okay, that's a pretty good trailer. So what I would do is my intention with the first couple minutes is I'm actually going to take out the first 23 seconds. My goal is to get straight into the question, specifically about all the different types of construction that are available and going through that. So now the trailer is really, really important. I spend probably an outsized amount of my time really thinking through the trailer because it determines. And more importantly, my promise to the audience is that I'm trying to save them as much time as possible and give them most value per unit of time. And when I apply that principle, I would say for me, and I try to think about myself sometimes too, right? It's like, hey, if I want to learn about construction, what is the most important thing I need to learn about construction? And for the different types of construction, mass timber, modular, concrete, stick frame, what are the big decisions that I'm not thinking about that somebody else with that experience might be thinking about? And that's the value that I can bring to any deal, any development. That type of thinking is what's going to allow you to bring your intellectual capital that you acquired from our podcast towards whatever development deal there is. So this is why it's so important. So you're just gonna watch me listen to the rest of it. I'm just here to listen, observe, and take notes to myself so I know what to fix next time.
And I just got to start from the beginning a little bit because Patrick, I want people to understand and get a little bit motivated and inspired by your career path because you didn't take the most linear path to construction.
Now you're gonna just watch me make some comments, right? Because
How did you even get into the world?
the interesting part is that I always try to set up my guests with a way for them to introduce themselves, but then also to build up the credibility. I want to establish his background as he's talking through all of this so that I can figure out how to best bring out the questions. Because how he tells me his background and what he cares most about is what I want to highlight. But more importantly, I want to figure out how do I help someone also, most importantly, figure out what is their career path. Because for me, I want people to understand that you can help, you can create an impact in affordable housing no matter what it is. This allows me to help the audience figure out, hey, who is Patrick and how do I become like him?
these are rent control properties, these are long-term tenants, but they have very little ability to have any kind of decision-making process around how we make their homes safe in an earthquake, or we know that these buildings are bad actors in a seismic situation. So that was a really interesting policy that we worked on. Some of the other things that we did were requiring San Francisco's private schools to be evaluated from a seismic standpoint. In the 1970s, we started doing that in California in the public schools, but it was never required for the private schools for a host of policy
Such an
reasons.
interesting
But
background.
working with
What a
some of the
big
local
problem, right? To try to make
municipalities,
your
we
structure
built a lot
seismically
of
safe
San
from
Francisco's public
earthquakes.
schools. Many of these schools were built before
Oh, that's
seismic.
such a big
So
problem.
requiring that evaluation gave those schools the important tools that they needed to make informed decisions about their risk. So we see a lot of schools undergoing voluntary seismic retrofits right now. And so through that process, it was a really exciting chance to make an impact on my city. But then also through that, I found my next job like where you wanted to be found. I was poached out of city government by Slitterton Builders in 2016 and came over to work for them, and I've been there ever since. My background does have a lot of that consulting work was for affordable housing developers, so it was sort of a natural niche for me to kind of fall back into that. And I've been working on our affordable housing work ever since then.
Wow, I so much unpack. But let me start with just helping the audience, because sometimes when you hear like big gnarly problems, a lot of people get so confused and they get a little bit scared, to be honest with you. Because when you talk about, wow, I have to go and look at the units for 120,000 people and figure out how to get it back to a safe standards, like just a pure logistics. What if I have to move people out? So it's such a big problem. Like, how did you even start looking at that problem to kind of fix it?
Well, I think with any complicated policy solution,
So what you see there is like I
starts
have
with
really focused on
understanding what the
tonality,
issues
how to
are.
figure out how to ask a question, because that's so important. When you have a curious tone, it invokes that storytelling information.
We had the apartment owners association sitting across from the tenants advocacy groups and understanding that, hey guys, this is a hard problem. There's a reason why we haven't fixed it yet. Let's get there together. And so that means, you give and take in the policy discussion. And as long as the overall arching goal does provide that benefit, sometimes we see public policy that frankly because of the infighting gets so watered down that it's ineffective. So I think that's the real challenge there is getting the people to the table, but then also having a path forward that really
Watching me work.
supports
All we're doing
everyone.
today.
And that's a hard thing to do. But in San Francisco, one of the things we do very well is to get different advocacy groups together to be able to understand where the pain points are and to come up with innovative solutions. You can't just slap a policy on the table and say it's good to go. I mean, you really have to think carefully about, to your point, making sure tenants aren't displaced as a result of trying to make their homes safer, right? Like, what would be the point of that if people are losing their homes in the process? So amending the rent ordinance was part of it to create automatic pass-through hardships and to understand how the property owners have to, protect their cash flow. How if they have to spend a lot of money on a seismic retrofit that they're not planning for, sometimes that could force the sale of a building. So there's very real pain points on kind of all sides of, frankly, every policy issue. And I think some of the thoughtful policymakers that we have, not only in San Francisco, but many of them are now operating at the state level, have brought that lens to their policy development. And I think it just makes for responsible government, no matter what you believe in politics.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just so impressed when you actually see things from strategy, policy, execution, like all the phases, and actually see it come to life, not just people using it as a soundbite on the news. And tell us maybe one problem that you faced during trying to get all these units back to meeting code and meeting the seismic safety standards. What was the biggest problem? Did you guys worry most about like logistics in terms of relocating residents, or was it financial cost to kind of do all this work?
It was a little bit of everything. If I look at the big buckets, I think let's start with the engineering. So a seismic retrofit of a property historically goes from the foundation to the roof of that structure, right? Any structural engineer will explain why that needs to happen that way. What we were proposing was a partial retrofit. We're in a soft-story building. You have a lot of weight above the first floor because of the units and the mass associated with that. But on the ground floor,
Oh,
you
this is a
either
good
had
B-roll. I
commercial
like it.
storefronts or you had a lot of openings for garage doors. In either case, it created sort of a weak first floor. So when you'd have some ground motion, you would see these buildings become collapse prone. Loma Prieta, Northridge, California earthquake points that we've experienced over the years have really seen the deficiencies in that type of construction. So getting the engineering community on board with the idea of a partial retrofit was a really difficult thing to do because structural engineers are historically pretty conservative along those lines, and getting them to do something that's sort of outside of what they've been taught does take some imagination. And the reason why we approached it that way is because if you did do a full seismic retrofit of these buildings, not only would it be cost prohibitive, but you would end up having to work in the residential units, and to your point, you'd end up having to relocate tenants, and that's not what we can do during a housing crisis, right? So the goal, first and foremost, was to keep tenants in their home during construction, which is little interruption to their services as possible. Retrofitting the ground floor, you can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs, right? So definitely there's construction involved, and so relocating parking was a big concern. So again, we addressed that with a standardized compensation across the board. So if a tenant did lose their parking temporarily,
This is such a great example of how much work it takes for you to do such a massive renovation project.
the capital improvement pass-throughs. The rent ordinance allows work that's required by the city, in this case a seismic retrofit, to be passed through to the tenant. We know most tenants can shoulder that. It's a minimal cost spread over the units, but we also know some can't. And so creating very clear hardship provisions was a big win for the tenant community because this applied to all capital improvement pass-throughs, not just our seismic retrofits. So we used that as an opportunity to help strengthen tenant protections, be able to keep them in their homes. And really everyone agrees
So good.
that someone that's on Social Security, someone that's been there long term, there's a whole host of reasons why you wouldn't want to see their rent increased. And so again, trying to ask common sense kind of goals and figure out how to get there from the policy perspective was very important. So I'd say kind of balancing the landlord tenant needs, balancing the engineering needs, and the other one was how are people going to pay for this? That was a really interesting conversation. And previously, the city of San Francisco had proposed a ballot initiative that was a general obligation bond to provide a loan fund for these retrofits. This was sort of an old playbook that had been previously done in the 1990s when the city retrofit their unreinforced Main Street buildings, and no one used that program. It was wildly unpopular, hard to qualify for, and so when this ballot initiative came forward, it was the first general obligation bond that I can remember in San Francisco history that did not pass the voters. So when I came on board with the city, we knew we had to take a different approach. We had the benefit of historically low interest rates, so I can't downplay that enough. That was a huge environment financially for lenders to be able to give money to folks that needed to do these retrofits. And we knew that a centralized loan program wasn't going to be the most effective way. So what we did is we held a financial summit in the mayor's office with the mayor and the heads of every bank that had an office in San Francisco and said, hey, we're not going to tell you what to do. We want you to come to the table with your own creativity, your own underwriting standards. We're not going to pigeonhole you. And what we ended up doing is creating a menu of financing options. In most cases, people were able to refi their house or refi their multi-family building and pull out that money to be able to do the retrofits. But in a lot of other cases, there were short-term loans with forgivable interest or other products, because at the end of the day, these banks hold the paper on these properties. If they collapse in an earthquake, they're heavily underinsured, right? Most people do not have earthquake insurance, so they quickly saw the risk of their own balance sheets being at risk. So being able to bring everyone to the table.
Interesting. So that's a pretty good B-roll.
We're not going to pigeonhole you, and what we ended up doing is creating a menu of financing options. In most cases, people were able to refi their house or refi their multi-family building and pull out that money to be able to do the retrofits. But in a lot of other cases, there were short-term loans with forgivable interest or other products, because at the end of the day, these banks hold the paper on these properties. If they collapse in an earthquake, they're heavily underinsured, right? Most people do not have earthquake insurance, so they quickly saw the risk of their own balance sheets being at risk. So being able to bring everyone to the table again, kind of in the spirit of full transparency, really created a variety of options for people to be able to finance the solution to their seismic problems.
Wow, I truly love how collaborative that process was, and the framework that you took to just understand, hey, what's the impact on the budget? What's the impact on timing for all these options? And what's the impact on the community for whichever option that we pick? Because I wish people would just take a very structured approach, take emotions out of the equation, and more important, bring other people. So it's more invitational, it's more collaborative, and that's how you usually come up with the best solutions. Oh wow, that was so.
So what I need to do is I need to finish the point with eye contact.
And you didn't start
mixed-use office and residential high-rise. Working on that project for several years, it was great. It was very intentional from my partners at Swinnerton, to kind of put me into that role to really understand our systems. I was very familiar with the company. I was very familiar with the industry in general, but to be able to understand how we build our buildings at Swinnerton was very important for me to get that background. And then we got hit by COVID. COVID changed the world in terms of the construction market in a big way. Many of our projects kept going because they were deemed essential, whether they were healthcare, whether they were critical housing, whether they were in a situation where you were pouring a foundation and needed to keep going. So from a company standpoint, we kept very busy throughout the pandemic, but we also saw the market changing. And knowing that we had done affordable housing work at Swinnerton for a long time, but frankly really treated it like it was just another residential building. And the reality is that client base is different, that tenant base is different, that financing is different. And so we took a more structured approach and actually said, okay, let's create this as one of our core target markets. And so for about the last 4 years, it's been a national market for us. So while we've done a lot of that work historically in places like California, places like Washington and Hawaii, now we're starting office building, and then they spend some time on an affordable housing development, it really changes their perspective on things. And while they might not be the beautiful glass towers that we sometimes build in our industry, they're products that provide such a huge benefit to our community, and you really start to get the buy-in. And us being an employee-owned firm, that definitely plays into that a lot. We take a lot of pride in the ownership of our company, and to see that play out in our communities is frankly a really exciting thing to see.
Wow. Like my heart just was so warm. I heard you tell a story about how your program just kind of see that home come to life, presence moving. That's so freaking cool, man. That's so rewarding. And to that end, you talked a little about financing, learning how this whole world works. Well, let me kind of ask it more straightforwardly. How are people getting projects built nowadays? Like, what sort of creative methods are you seeing being implemented that are actually helping developers make a deal pencil?
Well, let's talk about the tools that we already have, right? Low-income housing tax credits is probably the most common vehicle that we see to provide partial financing for affordable housing development. When you think about how advanced we are as a society here in 2025, and to think that the reason why we have low-income housing tax credits is because of tax reform that happened in the 1980s, that makes you sort of scratch your head and wonder if that is the most effective way. And the reality is that that does get units built. Low-income housing tax credits have been incredibly successful, but we also see their limitations. We sort of scoff and say, why does it take 10 years to develop an affordable housing building? And that's frankly because the site control is so complicated. The capital stack that you have to piece together, those low-income housing tax credits are only a certain chunk of that capital stack. So to understand other funding sources, other equity, other municipalities that are kicking in money from various programs, all of those have different requirements and different performance metrics that one has to consider. So putting that together is incredibly complicated. The nonprofit affordable housing developers that are the majority of my clients are incredible people because they're so dedicated to that mission. They're mission-driven people. They're in that world to make a difference. They do a lot with very little in terms of how they put their projects together. So I do think it's a tremendous opportunity for us to build more housing, but it's not building housing at the rate to make a difference. The fact is that we've been underbuilding housing as communities for decades, for a generation, and to be able to see that limited by how many tax credits are available, how many dollars are available, how can you get your investors to go do it? There's got to be another way, and we're seeing some innovations happen. We built our first workforce housing project in the city of Seattle a few years ago. That was a project that used no tax credits. And so there are some very smart people out there, but the reality is we're in tough economic times to make any project pencil regardless of its occupancy. So because of historically high interest rates, because of tariffs, because of a lot of other issues, there are challenges in the industry that cascade down into the affordable housing space and make work that is already very difficult even more difficult. So those are some of the pain points in putting one of those projects together.
And you talked about how you built the workforce housing project in Seattle with no tax credits. How do people understand how did you guys like make that happen? Because sometimes people like an affordable project with no tax credits, we haven't heard of it before. So how did you guys pull that off?
Sure, and admittedly, it is a bit of a unicorn of a deal. And Swinnerton, we really can't take credit for that. The real genius behind it was Giftstone Development and a person named AP Hurd, along with their partners at Community Roots Housing, being able to execute a plan on a site, a property that the organization already owned, helped. We already had site control. Being able to get innovation grants from the use of mass timber helped offset some of the pre-con costs. And so there were things along the way that were really part of the tried and true kind of typical way to approach an affordable housing development, but there were also these alternatives. So I think we were all challenged in a lot of different ways to think outside of the box, which is really, frankly, where I think the future is going. I think we will always build tax credit housing. I think unless we do major tax reform again as a society, we're going to always see that as a tool. But again, it's part of the solution. It is not the solution. So we need to see, frankly, housing built at all income levels. When we see the affordable housing space, we see everything from formerly homeless folks that are just coming off the street to workforce housing that's at 120% of AMI and everything in between. And that's really what you need to see. You need to see that healthy mix of housing options for people to have a society thrive.
And that's so interesting. And you mentioned that they already oversight for that project, so that probably gave them a little bit of equity to go get the construction loan, to go build the project. But and then you also mentioned that they got innovation grants from the use of mass timber to offset some of the pre-con costs. How people understand what are pre-construction costs first and foremost, let's define that for people that don't understand it. And what sort of creativity are people able to apply that you've seen work?
Sure. So in any affordable housing development, you're going to have a pre-development period, whether you're doing pre-construction, whether you're doing procurement. It's the stuff that happens before the shovels go in the ground, right? So during that period, most developers, especially affordable housing developers, have very limited pre-development funds. And that's a major challenge because we believe that putting the proper planning into your pre-construction process allows you to begin construction and not have any hiccups. You identify your known unknowns. You start to quantify those. You get a solid buyout from trade partners. So that way, when you start turning dirt on your project, you stick to the plan and everybody wins. When you're building a market rate development or you're building some other kind of occupancy, the tendency to change things midstream happens all the time. You'll see on a market rate development, there might be a new trend in the amenity space that developer wants to capture. So all of a sudden you're repricing something, you're reorganizing work, you're breaking your schedule and rebuilding it in the middle of that process. That costs you time and that costs you money. Affordable housing developers have neither of those. They have very strict requirements to start construction and complete construction, depending on their tax credits or other financing sources they might be accessing. And again, kind of developing that plan and sticking to it, there's no tolerance for change orders. When they get that financing capital stack complete, it's not like there's a magical 20% that's on top of it that we don't know about, right? So it's working within their budget to be smart about how we identify those items that we can value engineer, but also balance policies like providing meaningful work opportunities for people in our community that work for disadvantaged businesses. So being able to kind of mix all that together in a smart plan really has to happen before you start construction. If you're trying to do that midstream, it's going to fail in almost every single instance.
Yeah, I want to call out that a lot of times there's significant capital at risk for a developer. They are probably borrowing private money, private sources, or relying on grants just to hire your architects, your engineers, to get your drawings, to get your conceptual drawings. And all of this stuff costs money. And especially if you're trying to pursue a low-income housing tax credit project, where you're putting in an application, you might be spending $250,000, $500,000 in fees just so you can hope and pray that you get the tax credits that you can use to build your project. And that's why it's so risky for so many developers, especially if you don't have site control. And even if you have site control, you're asking the landowner that's contributing their land to wait on the sideline for 6 months, 12 months, not even years, because if you don't win it the first time around, you have to wait until the next.
Wouldn't be wrong.
What drives so much risk is that uncertainty of whether or not you're going to get the tax credits, and also whether or not you're even going to get the project approved in that situation. So I think you see that all the time.
We absolutely do. And we have projects. First of all, it's not uncommon for the typical affordable housing development to spend about 18 to 24 months in that pre-construction period. Frankly, that time is good for us because we can line it up to be able to execute. But then what happens when you hit the end of that 18, 24 months and then you find out they didn't get their tax credits? And then that deadline is all of a sudden, we're extended another year in some cases. We always know those projects are going to get built. We've never had a project that is, sort of entitled and falls off the boards from the affordable housing space. It's really about waiting and making sure that that financing is put in place. And that's an unknown variable to a large degree.
Wow.
The challenge for us as general contractors is to be diligent with those pre-construction dollars because, frankly, all of those developments don't have the amount of pre-construction funds that we need to be successful there anyway. So a lot of times we will take a hit during pre-con because we know it serves our best interest to have a good plan for our client. But when those get extended a year and we're still doing pricing and buyout and updating our trade packages, that's where we have to be very careful because we already are limited with those pre-development dollars. And that's true for pretty much everyone at the table during that period. Same thing with the architect managing their design fees. And anything that's going to happen before you close on your permanent construction loan that allows you to start funding the actual project. So we find that's a real tough space for our affordable housing developers. And we've come up with some tools to help kind of ease that cash flow burden that happens during pre-construction with the understanding that once we start, we're going to have a great plan and we're going to be successful together.
And I think this is why having some great partners that knows what they're doing is so crucial for any project to be successful. So when you talk a little bit
27.
Being the great partner you guys are, take a little hit during pre-construction.
So this is really important.
That's going to happen.
Get tax credits that you can use to build your project. And that's why it's so risky for so many developers. It's
very limited.
I should probably have a real just me talking, actually.
Being able to kind of mix all that together in a smart plan really has to happen before you start construction. If you're trying to do that midstream, it's going to fail in almost every single instance.
Yeah, and I want to call out.
All right, 24:48. So right now, let's cut a solo reel of just myself talking at the current 24:48. So I can highlight the risks that affordable housing developers face during pre-construction. Boom.
That a lot of times there's capital at.
So it's not uncommon for the typical affordable housing development.
And then make sure we have a reel of Patrick talking at 25:58, where he starts with "It's not uncommon." Boom, that's good reel. So you're seeing me listen to my entire podcast, but also figure out there's so much good information from this podcast that I don't care where people consume it. If people don't consume it on a long form YouTube video, then I would rather that they, at the minimum, consume it on a short form content, because these are the information that you would want to know.
18 to 24 months in that pre-construction period. Frankly, that time is good for us because we can line it up to be able to execute. But then what happens when you hit the end of that 18, 24 months and then you find out they didn't get their tax credits? And then that deadline is all of a sudden, we're extended another year in some cases. We always know those projects are going to get built. We've never had a project that is, sort of entitled and falls off the boards from the affordable housing space. It's really about waiting and making sure that that financing is put in place. And that's an unknown variable to a large degree. The challenge for us as general contractors is to be diligent with those pre-construction dollars because, frankly, all of those developments don't have the amount of pre-construction funds that we need to be successful there anyway. So a lot of times we will take a hit during pre-con because we know it serves our best interests to have a good plan for our client. But when those get extended a year and we're still doing pricing and buyout and updating our trade packages, that's where we have to be very careful because we already are limited with those pre-development dollars. And that's true for pretty much everyone at the table during that period. Same thing with the architect managing their design fees. And anything that's going to happen before you close on your permanent construction loan that allows you to start funding the actual project. So So we find that's a real tough space for our affordable housing developers. And we've come up with some tools to help kind of ease that cash flow burden that happens during pre-construction, with the understanding that once we start, we're going to have a great plan and we're going to be successful together.
And I think this is why having such a great partner that knows what they're doing is so crucial for any project to be successful. So when you talk a little bit about how sort of being the great partner that you guys are, takes a little hit during the pre-construction phase. What does that mean? Are you fronting some of the pre-development costs to kind of help usher along the process to get it? What does it mean?
Yeah, sometimes there's a few different tools. Sometimes we just heavily discount it right off the top, and we know that it's in our benefit to have robust and professional pre-construction services. And while sometimes the client may not either value that or may not be able to afford that, we're sort of agnostic there. We know that it sets us up for success, so we're going to do it no matter what. So sometimes that means, taking a significant discount to our pre-construction fees, depending on what their pre-development budget looks like. Sometimes that means pushing our pre-construction fees off until the close of construction loans. So that way, when you get your financing, you're paying us back for pre-construction services. There's other ways to do that in a way, but also the amount of money you can save during that by doing intelligent value engineering, by working collaboratively with the architect, you can drive a lot of money out of that project into shared savings for the owner.
And I love how you kind of explain all the different levers that you can pull. And I wish people would just understand that, yeah, you could discount your services, but you can also defer some of your fees into the construction loan funds so that you can start paying back any of the debts that you have incurred or the pre-construction services that you have incurred.
Don't like that one. Such as discounting fees, deferring fees until construction loan funds, or deferring fees until property stabilizes. Okay. Boom. And this is why I want to call out the different levers, right? I really want people to understand this concept here at 2855 for the current podcast. I want to see how people understand, hey, this is how you pull the levers to figure out if something is a deal or not. Just because we say it in the podcast does mean that I can't do a better job of highlighting and emphasizing the point, especially if someone's watching this on YouTube. This is so important to me.
Shows how great of a partner you guys are, because you guys want to get the planning right in the beginning so you can set yourself up for success. Because if you, what's the saying? It's like, if you fail to plan, your plan will fail. And that's so key to what I'm hearing right now. Is you guys understand, you know what you're doing, and you want to make sure you prepare your clients for that long road ahead. Because getting the deal funded is a big milestone, but then the real work actually has to begin. You actually got to stick to schedules and timelines and make sure people are performing and showing up on the site when they're supposed to.
And to that end, it's important that we get a phone call after the project is done. About 80% of our work we do at Swinnerton is with repeat clients. And I think taking the long view, we've been in business for 137 years. And to understand that, sure, we could play games, we could lowball, we could win that project. But if you play that game and you do those tricks in the beginning, the client, first of all, is going to be an unhappy relationship from the very beginning. It's going to create an adversarial nature on a job that no one enjoys on any side. The people running the job aren't going to have enough money in the job from a construction standpoint. The developer is going to be getting hit with change orders. Sure, you'll get that job done. Sure, you'll make money, but you will not get a phone call back and you will not get a reference check for the next job. So, you have to take the long view on these projects. We love the fact that we get repeat business with clients in the affordable housing space. And frankly, that's because of the transparency and dedication our teams bring to every project.
So good. And I want to wrap the pre-development phase, but help people understand what sort of services can Squarespace provide during the pre-construction phase. Are you kind of like, is it all in-house? You guys have all the resources for the engineering and all the pre-development services?
So we are a very dynamic firm. From a self-perform standpoint, we self-perform many major trades by ourselves, right? We do structural concrete, we do drywall, we do doors, frames, and hardware, we do rough and finish carpentry, we do demolition, we do millwork, we do mass timber setting, we do modular housing setting, and the list goes on and on. So being able to have those agreements in place between our teams to be able to understand what current market costs are a huge advantage to us, because we know where the wind is blowing, what that labor rate is going to be for that particular trade, what those union requirements are, what those prevailing wage requirements are, depending on where we're at and what we're working on. That helps inform it. But also, there's a big piece of that involves the community. So I think during that pre-development phase, making sure we clearly understand what any hiring goals might be, whether we're hiring workers from a HUD Section 3 list, or whether we have anywhere from 25 to 50% of the project budget set aside for small businesses, depending on where we're at in the program. Sometimes those are local business enterprises, sometimes those are minority business enterprises, and Swinnerton prides themselves on being embedded in that community. So when we do have hiring goals or subcontracting goals like that, it's not the first phone call we're making. We sit around the table a lot and talk about how peers in our space will do a good fake effort instead of a good faith effort. And, I just see too many contractors kind of let that roll off, or they complain that it adds cost to the job. I don't buy that. If you're in the community and you're a true community partner and you have those relationships, those folks are showing up on your job site whether or not there's a subcontracting goal. And so to be able to be in that space with authenticity really matters. And I think it matters to the way that our subs treat us, the way that they give us pricing because they know we're going to take care of them. That's an important link in the process to developing and executing successful affordable housing in my mind.
Yeah, there's so many different elements to this. So I kind of want to get into, you mentioned about mass timber, right? You guys talk about modular setting. And all of these different approaches to building all factor into making a deal work. Because you have to understand, it's a long list of expenses to build an apartment building. But how should people approach understanding, hey, how should I build this building, right? Obviously, we engage you in the beginning to kind of think through the different options. But how walk through folks, like what are the different options that you're seeing that's generating success, keeping costs manageable and predictable?
I think what's important from a general contractor role is to not pigeonhole the design team or the client into a particular construction typology. I think as experts in the space, our job is to show them the pros and cons associated with each and to let them make that decision. I think our job is to provide accurate information with a holistic view so that way they can understand it. I mean, currently our company is building the range of housing, right? Whether we're doing, traditional stick frame housing, whether we're doing podium construction with conventional framing above, whether we're doing all concrete, whether we're doing all mass timber, whether we're doing structural steel. We see all of that every day in our day-to-day lives. And so we understand that intimately from a construction standpoint, what that costs for the parts and pieces and for the labor, but also trying to think more holistically of what does it cost for that owner to insure that building after we're gone, and to think further down that life cycle and to really help them make decisions on factors that they may not be considering. And again, it's a challenge in the affordable housing space because you're working with those limited dollars. There's a way that they think might be the right approach, and maybe it is right. It's not our job to say it's wrong. Our job is to set the table, look at all those options, and for them to be able to say, okay, now I have the information I need to make an informed decision about how to move forward. That's the true partnership in that space that I think is really successful. So can we build any construction type and make it work? Absolutely. I really want our clients to have a good experience, and I want our clients to be building the product that they need to build for their portfolio to hang on to for long-term assets. And to really think through what that life cycle looks like is really, frankly, I think a differentiator between Swinnerton and our peers in the space.
Wow. Usually people would just look at, we're just going to build this project modular because it's supposed to be stacked like Lego blocks and should go really, really fast. But you think way more ahead, not just in terms of time, in terms of budget, but you you even help them think about the downstream insurance costs for what it takes to ensure that building over the life cycle of that building. That shows me that you guys are really in tune with the level of details throughout the entire process, because you have to think way downstream versus some other GCs when you're like, oh no, that's the way we go. That's $300 a square foot. It'll take you 18 months. Blah 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 blah. And that's usually what people do. But you guys have to think way further ahead. So tell us, maybe I'll phrase this question this way: what are the questions that developers should ask that they might not typically ask, especially when they're comparing all these different options between like podium, concrete, all mass timber, all structural steel? Like, any sort of questions that you think your client should be asking, but sometimes they don't?
Yeah, and if we look at the typical affordable housing development, right, there's really innovative developments out there that are providing affordable home ownership, which I think is an amazing way to build generational wealth, but that's not the typical product. The typical product is essentially an apartment building, right, that's in compliance, and so that developer is almost always the long-term owner of the property. So thinking through that is really important, but also looking at, so first of all, what does the architect say, right? They hired the architect for a reason. These are design professionals that we absolutely respect in the space. So, we try to start with that as a baseline. What is the architect proposing? And then from there, we can provide some basic constructability feedback. Hey, this detail could save you a lot of money because you have to do this 50 times on this building, and if you simplify it, you're saving a bunch of money. Kind of typical contractor value engineering happens, but also looking at the different pain points. We build a lot of modular housing, and modular is a great solution in the industry. But the reality is you need a big upfront deposit to pay the factory, whoever's building your mods. And as we discussed earlier, a lot of times these developments don't have the pre-development funds they need to be able to get in on that deposit. You see other issues come up, but in that situation,
Can we delete that B-roll of the modular? Different type of B-roll. So I didn't like that B-roll right there. Let's see, where is it?
But also looking at the different pain points. We build a lot of modular.
37. Wait. Yeah, I didn't like this B-roll because it's just like a weird. Usually you don't put modular into a building like that. It's very weird.
You see other issues come up, but in that situation, right now we're building a farm worker housing development with our partners at EAH in the Salinas Valley. Modular's been an excellent choice for that because it's a part of the state that has a smaller subbase, and we can be sort of lighter on the land, as we say, with a smaller crew to be able to set those modular units and build that development more efficiently. It's not always the most efficient case, right? So I think talking about each project individually, looking at what the community wants. One of the things that I've seen happen, let's say in the last 5 to 7 years, which has been really interesting, is the development of local density bonuses or state density bonuses. So properties that were previously, 4 or 5 stories in height can now be high rises. And I think that's so interesting because, first of all, it's a higher use for that land. You're able to co-locate affordable housing near critical services and transportation, which should already be happening, but unfortunately it hasn't been. A lot of times our affordable housing communities are built in sort of deserts around without any food service, without any groceries, without any transit, without any health services. Being smart about where we locate those, because frankly, everybody that's in an affordable housing development is part of our community. They need to be integrated well into our community. And that's how we see this sea change that's happening right now. I can remember being much younger and being in this space and sort of people thinking differently about that. So the idea that we can build bigger, build taller, get more units onto a site is beneficial in a lot of ways. First of all, you're taking a bigger bite out more units and ultimately get that cost per unit into a better place that meets that developer's performance. We've seen that happen multiple times where we can get intelligent with space planning, maybe squeeze another floor of units in. That extra floor of units totally flips the game, right? It's a really interesting way to try to do it, because at the end of the day, we're not going to solve the housing crisis by building duplexes. They're part of that solution, right? They provide housing, so I'm not totally against it, but you're not making the impact the way that you do if you build a 200-unit building or a 400-unit building, which is really the scale we need to be thinking about when we talk about housing production in the United States.
Oh yeah, so good.
This is why I wanted you to come on this podcast so bad, Patrick, man, because these are the creative thoughts and the way you approach a deal. Because I always tell people that, hey, a deal that might not be a deal for your luxury Class A development, it might be a deal for an affordable deal if you have the right partner. You might have someone like Patrick helping you look at a deal and say, hey, all of a sudden we squeeze an extra four because of the design or how we value engineer the entire process, because now you get an extra 4 units. And now all of a sudden you have enough income from your rental units to service the underlying debt.
Mm-hmm.
That's the number one problem that when people say, hey, does this deal pencil? It really means whether or not that project has an ability to generate enough revenue to cover the underlying debt service on that land. Sometimes it might be a 1.15 debt service coverage ratio, it might be 1.25, depending on the type of loan project you have. But that's what it takes. I wanted you to come on because actually you talked so much about all the different levers involved, from the pre-construction leverage to the way you approach building it, whether that's modular, hey, maybe it's faster, the bigger upfront deposit. So now you're really educating everyone on exactly how to make these decisions with all the information with an experienced partner by their side. This is so freaking good, man. Can you tell them freaking jazz about this, man? This is freaking exciting, dude. Oh my god, I love geeking out about development. So, all right, let's keep going, Patrick, because I want to let's talk about mass timber, because you talked a little bit about earlier. Not a lot of people know what mass timber is. So, Patrick, tell us a little bit about what sort of innovation you're seeing in that space and how you guys are bringing that to market.
Sure, yeah. What excites us about mass timber?
I need to do a much better job of not fading out at the end of my question.
It is the most sustainable and the most renewable resource that we can use in the construction industry. Sometimes it's hard for people to wrap their head around because they think of the images of when we were younger and you'd hear about clear cutting of forests to make a wood product. But what's happening now is really exciting in the mass timber space, and it's not exactly new technology, right? Other countries have been building with mass timber for years. It's been a hotbed of construction in the Pacific Northwest. General contractor, we've completed over 65 mass timber buildings, which I believe is more than any other GC in the United States. And so we're really committed to that technology for a few reasons. We like that there's heavily influenced by prefabrication. The idea that we can take raw lumber, whether that's a piece of glulam or whether that's a piece of CLT, bring it to our fabrication facility, set it up with the hardware, ship it out to our job sites, and it goes up very quickly. It's great for urban infill sites. It's very quiet as it goes up. And so from the construction logistics standpoint, we really see that benefit. No other material that we build with in our industry can tell that sustainability story like mass timber can. But then let's talk about what the product at the end of the day looks like. So then you're walking into, whether it's a residential unit or whether it's an office building, wherever we're building mass timber, you walk in and all of a sudden you get that smell, you get that feel, that there's, we call it biophilia, right? So you're that exposure to wood.
Interesting. I never knew that about mass timber.
In your system that kind of puts you at ease and puts you in a calmer state. And we've seen a lot of studies that are starting to emerge. So say you have surgery and you're recovering in a mass timber room. Your recovery is actually going to be faster than if you're in a room that's concrete and drywall. Now, much smarter people than us are going to have to quantify that to understand how it really works out. But you think of that overall concept being applied to any type of affordable housing. It doesn't matter whether you're talking about folks coming right off the street or you're talking about higher end workforce housing or anything in between. That idea that you're trying to give these people a leg up for whatever reason. And to be able to do that in something so equitable that has that not only that environmental benefit from the actual construction, but then just the feeling that you're going to get living in that unit, that's huge. Again, it's a hard thing to quantify, but it's one of the things that we're really excited about as we see more and more of this being adopted in the community. But also at some point, I feel like we've been building with concrete for 140 years. We're going to continue to build with concrete. It's a great building material, has a pretty nasty carbon footprint. And at some point, our building codes are going to catch up to that. And I believe strongly that at some point our building codes are going to talk about embodying carbon. And when we think about that, it's a total game changer for this technology. So as a company, we've invested heavily building our own CLT manufacturing plant, which is topping out its construction next week. We'll be online in 2026. We have 2 glue lamp manufacturers, we have a sawmill, and we have 2 fabrication facilities, one on the West Coast, one on the East Coast, to help serve the domestic supply of mass timber that, frankly, we see as the future of construction.
Whoa, that is a massive operation. To not just be a GC firm, but also to sort of have your own manufacturing operation to kind of generate all the supply. So for people that don't really understand, like, hey, difference between mass timber, difference between concrete, difference between modular, are there 1 or 2 typical pros and cons of each one that you can possibly share with us today? Let's go through mass timber. Like, what type of project is it best suited for, and what might be the downfall of it?
So today, mass timber has been seen as a bit of a premium in the industry. Now that is changing day by day with the amount of domestic supply that's available, with the other amount of providers that are able to put product into the marketplace. That supply and demand curve is constantly in flux. So we're seeing those prices normalize over time. Overall, capitalizing, getting the finance stack for a mass timber building may be more difficult than, say, a concrete building. So the developers going through that triage of kind of figuring out what they want to build. If they're going to build mass timber, usually they have a strong commitment, whether it's organizationally or personally, to sustainability. That's something that's upfront and part of why they're putting their money where their mouth is. The reality is if we're looking at high density affordable housing, concrete tends to make the most sense from a development standpoint today. The reason being is that we see the speed of construction with concrete. We can do anywhere from 3 to 5 day pour cycles, so your floors are going up much faster than, say, a conventional wood frame building or other types of approaches. So you have that going. You're able to maximize that floor ceiling space, so you're getting the most amount of units with proper head height in the smallest amount of building possible, which allows you to save money on your exterior skin and other systems throughout the process. So, being smart about your structure has cascading impacts to how you build the rest of it. Now, the other side of that is thinking about long-term insurance. We've seen a lot of our clients that would traditionally build a conventional stick frame product looking more at concrete because of this insurance savings on permanent property insurance over the course of, say, 10 years. We did some modeling for our client on a 7-story building. It could be, it was originally podium with sort of stick framing above, and we looked at that compared to a concrete approach. Concrete saved them time because the construction schedule was faster due to concrete structure, but also our builder's risk policy that we carried during that project was roughly a third of the cost for non-combustible construction versus something like wood framing. And then you pass that along to permanent property insurance. A concrete building, the same hypothetical building, save the client close to $5 million over the course of 10 years of owning that building. So again, you might have a development lead that's thinking about the construction cost, but a lot of times the development part of that company doesn't always talk to the asset management.
Oh yeah, so true.
Having conversations between those silos is really important because that may not be a pain point for someone, but it also may be a deal killer for someone. So again, we don't come in with the approach saying, hey, you must do this because this is why we think it makes sense. We're saying, these are the pros and cons of these different approaches. We can build them all for you. It's your choice. But we want you to make sure you understand what the pros and cons are with each path forward that you might take.
And just like that, if you save $500,000 on an annual basis for your insurance expenses, you divide that on a 5.5 cap rate, you're adding $9 million of value to your property. That's huge. For someone like Swinnerton, like Patrick's team, helping you understand throughout the entire process what's your overall savings, not just on your time to build, but also going downstream. So I love that we just brought that entire concept together, Patrick, and made it really real for people with actual numbers to talk through. So we talked about mass timber, we talked about concrete, traditional stick frame. What about modular? We hear about modular so often. You mentioned one of the cons is having a big down payment for that deposit to get the plan up. Is it truly a lot faster to build modular? What have you seen?
When modular projects are done correctly, they're amazing. What I've seen is there's folks in the industry that are trying it for the first time, or as a
So true.
friend of mine who is the affordable housing development said, they never want to pay the dumb tax, right? They never want to be the first person to come out the gate and try something. So we've seen a lot of modular projects go wrong too. Luckily, the ones in Swinnerton that we've built have all been very successful, and I think it's because we choose good partners from the beginning. But it's very hard when you look at the different factories, right? There's a handful of factories in the West Coast that provide volumetric modular for our projects. We know them all individually. We've pre-qualified them. We understand their bonding capability. We understand what their supply chain looks like. What happens a lot of times with a new factory is they're usually propped up by some sort of venture capitalist funding or other investors. So they don't have that track record of actually building projects, which makes them, from a supplier standpoint, we treat them just in a lot of ways just like any other supplier, someone that I'm buying structural steel from, or someone that I'm buying mechanical equipment from. So they still have to check all the boxes in terms of what it means for them to be, frankly, a sound financial partner with us. And so we see a lot of the growing pains that happen, and we've found some innovative ways to help them. In some situations where, say, a factory wasn't able to cover the bond because of the size of the job, we'll lend our balance sheet support at Swinnerton to be able to help make that project go. Does that incur additional risk for us? Absolutely. So we have to be measured on how we do that. But I think modular is a great solution. It's going to be somewhat contentious in some cities. So in some cases, you've seen, depending on the labor situation in a particular geography, folks come out from the building trades to speak against it. Frankly, I think it's a little tone deaf, in my opinion. I understand where they're coming from on it, but I don't think the propensity of modular construction is going to put union labor out of business. We are a signatory union general contractor in California, and I kind of think they're failing to see the forest through the trees, in my opinion. Again, it's a partial solution. It is not the solution. None of these typologies are the be-all, end-all of fixing our housing crisis. They all have to work in harmony with one another, and they all have their place
Yes, correct.
in society.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And obviously, speed is a big item when it comes to modular. Are there any limitations to how dense or how high a modular building can go?
Most modular that we see in California is built in what they call type 5 construction. So that means it's using conventional wood framing, it's using 2x4s. So the reality is that the mass and volume of that building is limited like any other conventional wood frame, or maybe it's over a podium, but it meets the same definitions in Chapter 5 of the building code, how big you can build it based on the construction type. Now, there are other modular companies out there that are using non-combustible materials. That changes the game. If you start to pigeon yourself into a type 1 or type 2 construction type, then all of a sudden your height and bulk can get much larger based on the allowances in the building code. So it's really about understanding the size and matching your construction technology appropriately with the mass of the building.
So good. And I have so many more questions for you, man, but this has just been too fun. And
Lay 'em on me.
I'm going to ask you a couple of different things. And I was setting it up with this question because, Patrick, when I started this podcast 3 years ago, right, a lot of people said, Ken, you're never going to be able to solve this affordable housing problem. And I told them, hey, I beg to differ. I think it's just a matter of time before we collect all the pieces of the puzzle. Because even if we don't solve it in our life,
I'm almost there. Almost done with this live. So good. I'm so glad I'm finishing this.
I view you as such a big piece of that puzzle, Patrick. If you came on, you're so open with the sheer knowledge that people can't get in like master's degree.
All right, I'm going to finish this up because we're approaching bedtime. Have a good one, everybody.